beautiful weather. Let's take a look at where things are at. So you had an exam on Friday, and my goal is to have all of those tests graded so that we can go over the solution together in Friday's class this week. So I'll be grading those, but my plan is to keep the scores hidden until I'm finished with all of them, and then we'll go over the solution, and if there's any questions and that sort of thing, then we can address it. So that's exam 2, and just looking at the schedule, we don't have too much more time until the end of the semester. We've got this week and 2 more after this week in the semester as far as instruction, and then the week after that is final exam week. So we're definitely getting closer to the end each day. Your next homework assignment is available now. It's on Blackboard, and it covers budget limitations, which we're going to be discussing in today's class. And so, after today's class, that should give you plenty of time to think about and solve. There's just a single problem related to budget limitations, and it's almost not identical, but it's very similar to the in-class exercise we have today. So there's that budget limitations problem, and then I've just today created a new problem to add on to that assignment that is maybe to whet your appetite thinking a little bit more about the project. I get a sense that some people have made good progress on the project already, but a few others are having a hard time getting started and overcoming kind of the fear of the unknown, and starting with a blank page is difficult sometimes. And so this homework problem is just simple arithmetic really, but in asking you this question on the homework, it kind of implies a thinking and a procedure that I believe will be helpful to you in understanding the project a little bit better, and specifically the spreadsheet part of that project. So homework 11 is due on Friday, the end of this week. Upload it before class, upload it to Blackboard. And then looking a little bit longer term, the project itself is due on Wednesday the 21st. And so you've just now got over 2 weeks for that. Is that 2 weeks or 3 weeks? Let's see. Today is the 5th. Okay, so you've got still some time to get that done. So we're moving on to chapter 12 now in the book, if you're following along, where we acknowledge the idea that organizations don't have access to unlimited capital, and when we have multiple alternatives, how do we ensure that the organization is finding that combination of projects that maximizes profit? So we've just kind of taken a brief detour through some analysis methods that allowed us to evaluate nonprofit companies and organizations. So I'm speaking specifically of like cost effectiveness analysis, economic service life analysis, benefit cost. So all of those things we're talking about nonprofit organizations, and now we're going back to some ideas that do have applicability to both profit and nonprofit organizations. So let's talk about capital rationing. Whether you're a government or a business, there are limits on the available investment capital. And you may remember that we looked at a curve very early in the semester that showed that as the borrowing amount increases, so does the interest rate that the lender requires. You remember that curve where maybe for the first couple of $1 million, the interest rate was flat, but then as you got to $6, $7, $8 million that you wanted to borrow, then the interest rate was going higher, and the idea there was that the lender was becoming increasingly uneasy about the risk. And specifically, they're worried that the risk of non-payment is elevated because you have trouble making your payments if you have a huge amount borrowed. Then the interest and principal payments that are recurring get larger, and so maybe your revenues wouldn't cover it. So for a variety of reasons, and maybe in the case of a government, there's a limit on the available capital simply because they don't want to tax people too much. If they take too much in taxes, then maybe the people will vote them out of office, or maybe they know that they'll stifle the economy if there's too much taxation, or businesses could offshore to different countries with lower tax rates. And so whether you're for-profit, nonprofit, and regardless of whether you're borrowing the money or it's money you already had saved that you're using for new investments, or if it's money that you're extracting from people from taxations, there's limits. So we cannot access unlimited funds. So just as an illustration, I want to show you a couple of projects from where I used to live. I spent 5 years living over in the United Arab Emirates. These are all projects that are in Dubai. I lived in the emirate next to Dubai called Sharjah, and I really loved it over there. It's a fantastic place. And one of the interesting things about living in the UAE is it seems like all of these amazing projects that would maybe be impossible anywhere else, not only are they conceived of, but in most cases they're actually constructed, and you can go see, for example, an aquarium at a mall, or you can go see an offshore island that was created artificially, and there's luxury homes and hotels. It's really there. This is called the Palm, and it's really a marvel. It took them several years. What they did was they took these dredging ships and they would suck sand off of the bottom of the sea and pile it up and compact the sand. And there aren't huge waves in the UAE, but they did put like a ring of rocks and riprap around the outside edge to kind of shield that piled up sand. And now there are $1 million homes, $1 million apartments really, up and down the Palm. So they were able to do that. That's something that was actually built. And if you look at a satellite image of Dubai, you can see the Palm from space. Many people are already familiar about the Burj Khalifa. I don't know if it's still the tallest building of the world. There may be other ones that are under construction that are going to be larger than it, but it's certainly the biggest building I've ever been in. They have a couple of observation decks, and it's the center of a really exciting shopping mall and kind of new development. So the Burj Khalifa, another really expensive project, but it's one that they did. Now, I remember when I was there reading several occasions in the newspaper about a proposed underwater hotel, and this wasn't actually built. The other two, these are pictures. This is just an artist's conception because it was never actually constructed. This idea of an underwater hotel, there's only so many amazing, world-class, never been done before type projects that an organization can undertake, and even that organization, as visionary and well-funded as the Emirate of Dubai. So the underwater hotel is still maybe in the planning stages and dreaming stages, but they didn't do it yet because there were limits on available investment capital. So what every organization should do when there are budget limits is a budgeting study that looks at every alternative and how much cash flow or how much benefit could be generated from every project. And then what you do is combine different alternatives together, and you find out what is the combined benefit or the combined profits associated with each combination of alternatives. Now, when you do this, you assume that projects are either accepted or rejected, and there's no partial funding of a project. You know what the cost of construction is, you have an estimate of what are the revenues going to be from that project, and you just, in a binary way, you say either we're doing this or we're not doing this, and just for simplicity's sake, each project doesn't have a partial construction alternative. Now, the budgetary constraint is going to be the upper limit of how much money can be spent. And in today's in-class exercise, what we're going to do is just look at a hypothetical batch of projects and see how many of those projects are feasible based on the budget limits. And then for each bundle of possibilities, what is the present value of the profits of those projects? Our objective when we do that study is to maximize the return on investment if it's a for-profit organization, and if it is a not-for-profit organization, then our objective would be to maximize the benefits. So return on investment kind of implies dollars and profits, but remember, sometimes we can monetize benefits like improved safety, improved environmental quality, reduction in pollution, those sorts of things. We can quantify those benefits. And so if you're doing a capital budgeting study on nonprofit project alternatives, then your objective would be to maximize the value of the benefits. So this figure just kind of summarizes the process we're going to go through. And by the way, if there are any questions, feel free to interject. You can type them into the chat box, or even better, unmute your microphone and jump in and ask a question if you've got one. So what this figure is illustrating is, let's say we have three alternatives. That we have option A, option B, and option C. And you can see that each one of them is going to have a different initial investment required, and then a different set of assumptions for what kind of cash flow lifespan we're looking at. So you've got your initial investment, how much net revenue is coming each year, and net revenue means the income for a project minus its ongoing annual maintenance and operation costs, fuel costs, labor costs, basically the profit. Net cash flow means how much profit do you get to capture in the future for making an investment today. Now, a capital investment limit is just how much you are able to borrow at a certain interest rate, and we know that we're going to have to only consider groupings of alternatives that is under this limit. And so we could select 0 projects, and this is a very important point, that the do-nothing alternative is one that we have to keep in mind, that sometimes none of the projects are justified, and so we shouldn't move forward with any options that are on the table. But we could potentially select up to all 3 if they fit within the capital investment limit. Now, the number of bundles, the number of possible permutations or groups, is 2 to the m, where m is how many projects you have. Okay, so let's say in the example we're going to do today, we have project A, B, C, and D. So you can see that that is 4 projects. So m is 4. So there are 2 to the 4th possible bundles. And does anybody have a, well, maybe you can do it in your head, but if you've got a calculator, 2 to the 4th, or 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, what number is that? 16, Seth's got it. Okay, so there's 16 bundles. Now here's a kind of a tricky thing. If there's A, B, C, and D, we want to know what are the different combinations that get you to 16. And let me tell you, for example, one of the possibilities is that you just do project A. So A only is one of the 16 possibilities. B only is one of the 16 possibilities. And C and D, okay, so there's 4 options. Next, there's A and B. So then that would be a 5th bundle, that you're only doing A and B and you're not doing C and D. Okay, so AB is a bundle, AC is a bundle, AD. So what I'd like you to do, I'm going to pause for a moment, and you know that there are supposed to be 16 bundles with these 4 base possibilities. Write them out. Hopefully you have this in-class exercise printed and you can write it on that page. If you do, write out what are the bundles. Just write them on paper. Or, you know, if you have the notes handy, you could write it in the margin of the notes. This is important. Write out, and we're looking for 16. So can you get to all 16 bundles? So I'll pause for a moment and give you a chance to see if you can think up what are all the 16 bundles. And then, of course, I'll show them to you, as well as kind of an approach that we can use with Excel to do this study. Okay, I've got a couple of good questions in the chat box. So Aaron asks, none is an option. And yes, that is one of the 16 possibilities, is do nothing. And Seth asks, aren't 6 of them just repeats? And okay, this is something I should have mentioned earlier. AB is the same as BA. So that doesn't count as 2 different bundles. So, I mean, you could think of lots of different repeats, you know, AC, CA, but those are not considered distinct. There are 16 distinct options that are different combinations besides just rearranging the order of the letters. So let me give you another moment or two to keep looking for those. And yes, none and A are both, those are 2 of the 16 options. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to fire up Excel, and I'm going to start writing out those options in Excel. There's no automated script, well, at least maybe there is, but not built into Excel that will generate those possibilities for you. You could probably code it yourself, but once you get into the pattern, I think you'll see that it's not really too complex. Okay, so this is in-class exercise 30. All right. So we know that there should be 16 different possibilities. So I'm going to number them 1 through 16. All right, so the first combination is do nothing. And there's A, B, C, D. Oh, D, space. Chad's got 15. Anybody get all the way up to 16? Okay, then there's AB, AC, AD. So that is matching A with all of the other options. Okay, now what about matching B with the other options that haven't already been matched up? So there's BC, Jonathan's got them all. BC is distinct, and there's BD, but we wouldn't say BA because that was already done. All right, so now we've got C in any of the other 1 options that hasn't been done yet, and the only one is CD. That was the only C-related combination that was unique. So we've got none of them, single options. These are all of the pair possibilities. Now we'll go through combinations of 3. So the 3 combinations, you could have ABC, you could have ACD, BCD, oh, I missed one, ABC, ABD, there we go. I like to follow a pattern. ACD and BCD. Chad's got it. What was the 16th, Chad? ABCD? All right, so for me, the 16th is ABCD. All right, so now we've got those 16 unique combinations. And so this is just like the order of the options doesn't matter, because what you're essentially saying is, you know, we're going to buy computers, upgrade the warehouse, refurbish the loading dock, and buy employee uniforms. You're doing 4 projects, and it doesn't matter what order you describe them in. The idea is just which projects you're doing. Okay. So this is kind of a brute force approach, and what we want to know is how much profit are we going to get for each one of these. But the first thing we can do is like an initial screening. So we'll find out the cost for each alternative and group of alternatives and compare it to a budget limit. Okay, so what does this in-class exercise say for what's our budget limit? The budget limit is $23,500. Now, let me ask you, if an option or group of options costs $23,500, should it be acceptable if that's the budget limit? The answer is yes. You can go to the limit, but you can't exceed the limit. So if we hit $23,500, then acceptable, yes. All right, so what we have is the cost data here, so 10,000, 5,500, 8,500, and 15,000. Okay, so do nothing costs nothing. Option A is, I'm going to put a minus sign here. Even though I know it's a cost as an outflow, I'm still going to put the minus sign, and you'll see why later. So 10,000 was option A. And I like to have the commas in there because too many zeros without the commas and it can maybe not look as good. So I'm going to format this as currency, and that way I'll get those commas to help break it up, but I'll round down so I don't have to see the cents. Okay, so it was 10,000, 5,500, 8,500, and 15,000. All right, so those are the individual costs. And now let's look at the bundled costs. So if we do different groups of things. So for instance, if I do A and B together, I can say A and B. So it's the cost of both of them together. A and C. Here we say A and C. You know, I want to show you a little interesting trick. Each cell has a name. So for example, this. That is C9. And if you look up here, C9 is the name of the cell. But you could also give things other names besides C9. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this cell. I'm just going to call it A. I think I can do that. Sometimes the names have to be more sophisticated than that. But let me see if I can just rename that as A. So I'm typing in A. And then I'm going to rename this one B. So there's A, B. I'm going to call this one C. And I think you probably can see, I can't call this one C because I'm in column C. So it would be like kind of a circular reference. I know what I'll do. I'll call it, since I can't call it the letter C, I'm going to call it SEE. Okay. And then there's D. I'll rename this one D. All right. So the advantage of doing that, now here, instead of clicking up on the cell, I can just say A plus D. That's nice, right? This one equals B plus C. This one, B plus D. C plus D. So maybe it's fewer keystrokes, or you know, you don't have to touch the mouse as often. A plus B plus C. A plus B plus D. It's monotonous enough, even with those shortcuts. A plus C plus D. B plus C plus D. Oh. Okay. So these are the costs of each bundle. Any questions so far about what we've done, or was it too confusing, this thing about renaming the cells? Like we could rename this cell, we could call it budget limit if we wanted to. You can call it B5, or you can call it, let me call it limit. Yeah, it's useful sometimes. All right, so the next column we're going to have is a screening question. Is it possible? Relative to our limit, and it says here the budget limit is 23,500. So our rule is you can hit the budget limit, but you can't exceed the limit. Okay, so budget limit negative 23,500. So for example, we know that a cost of 0 is acceptable because it's not more negative than the budget limit. But for example, this 39,000, that's not okay because it's more negative than the budget limit. All right, so instead of typing it in manually, I'm going to do an if. I'm going to demonstrate the if function here. All right, so equals if, and then a parentheses. Now it's telling me logical test. So the logical test is if this is greater than or equal to our limit. So then remember how negative works. If it's more negative, that's bad because that's over the limit. So I'm saying if the cost is greater than the limit, meaning more positive, then I want it to say like yes. But if it's false, if that logical test is false, then I want it to say no. Okay. I think it's parentheses that I want to use here. It might be a single parenthesis. We'll see if it gives me an error message. So we know this should say yes, it's possible. Okay, it's working. Yes, it's possible. And then I guess I ought to anchor the reference. Oh no, the limit. That already anchors it, but using the word limit there. So I don't have to worry about doing dollar signs because it's always going to look at limit. Okay, so I'm going to drag this down, and it automatically identifies, for instance, this one, 23,500, combination CD. It's possible. Some of the rest of these, not possible, because they're too expensive. So we've kind of taken the monotony out of manually doing yes and no for each of these, just with that if-then statement. So let me show you again. Let's do that from scratch, because there's a couple ways you could do this. We could say equals if, all right, so if this is, here's another way of looking at it. If it is less than this, okay, so that's going to mean if it's more negative. Well, let me anchor the reference there. So if it's less than the limit, then it should say no, it's not possible. But if that's false, meaning that it's greater than or equal to, then it will say yes. So it's just kind of the reverse logic of the first one I did. In the first time I showed it, I was saying that the cost is more positive or equal to the limit. This time I'm saying if the cost is more negative than the limit, then it should say no. So that would be kind of like the negative trigger. Otherwise, so this second parenthesis is what if this logical test is not true? Then it should say yes, meaning yes, it is possible. So it says yes, it's possible. Yes, it's possible. Then it'll say no for all these ones that are too expensive, and this edge case, right at the limit, it's still detecting that as a yes. So it worked out good. Okay, so the in-class exercise says how many feasible bundles are there? Okay, so how many feasible bundles? One, how many yeses, in other words? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, 10 feasible bundles. Let me show you just another way, you know how I had to manually count right now? There are 10 feasible bundles. Here's another Excel trick. What if my logical test, instead of putting words in there, what if it returned numbers? What if for no it says 0, and for yes it says 1? What would be the utility of that? If instead of text, if it does numbers, then all I have to do is up here, I can, or at the bottom, I can count. So equals sum. And if each one of the feasible bundles is a 1, then it tells me that there are 10 feasible bundles. So that's another thing that sometimes when I'm using Excel for a logical test, if I'm trying to sort things, possible, not possible, you know, graduating, not graduating, that sort of thing. If you're binning into different categories, then you can do a logical test and have it return a number. Okay, so we've got 10 feasible bundles. So are there any questions so far in part 1? Binary coding class, yeah. Okay, now it says continuing with the acceptable bundles, each project will have an 8-year duration. The MAR is 12%. And here is the annual net cash flow. So this is talking about how much profit you get from each alternative. And we want to know basically which bundle is most valuable. Because so far we just know which bundles are possible. So let me start over here, part 2. Which bundle is best? This part 1 was just which bundles are feasible. Aaron, you might need to take off the quote quotes. Like if you still had the quotes from before, then what it's doing is it's returning those numbers as text rather than as numbers. So if your numbers are over on the left, then it's actually that it's not treating it like a number. It's treating it like a letter, and then you can't add up the numbers. So one of the keys is if it's formatted to the left rather than formatted to the right. All right, so remove those quotations, and I think it'll become numbers rather than text. You know, it's like string if you have the quotations there. Okay, so part 2, which bundles are best? Again, we still have this same budget limit, so I'm still going to say B is negative 23,500. This time, though, I'm also going to have the number of years. The problem said it's 8-year lifespan for each project, and our MAR interest rate is 12%, so 0.12. Okay, so I'm going to have bundle, the cost for the bundle, annual net cash flow, and then the present worth of the bundle. Okay. So we'll put all of the actual bundles that exist. So there's the do nothing alternative. There was A, B, C, B space, C, D, AB, AC. Now I'm skipping over AD. That's not an acceptable bundle. You know, maybe what I ought to do is just highlight all these ones that are possible. So I'll highlight it like that, and I'm pressing the control button, and I'm going to highlight these ones at the same time. Oh, I don't need the possible thing. All right, let me start over. Combination and cost, control, combination and cost. There we go. That way I don't have to type it all in from scratch. So I'm going to do Control C to copy, and then Control V to paste. All right. Just double check that the numbers are all correct. It looks like they are. Okay. Interesting, it pasted over the number rather than formula. I'm glad it did, because here 18,500 came from, you know, it was C9 plus C11. When you paste things over, you have to be conscious of whether it pasted the values or whether it pasted the yeah, oh sorry, I didn't notice the question. Yeah, so you highlight like so, and then you press the control button and you continue highlighting. Or you could just do the whole thing and then delete the row that doesn't apply. That would be the other way. But it's maybe even more slick if you omit the data by pressing the control button as you, and press and hold as you continue dragging the mouse cursor. All right, so we've got our bundle and cost. Now the annual net cash flow. This is from here. So let me just copy this, Control C, and paste it over. This time I'm going to make sure that I paste the values I don't want. So Control V, it's going to do some formatting. So over here on the clipboard, it gives me the options to strip away like the shading. If I just paste only the destination, I think it'll paste without the shading. Okay. So we've got our costs, our net cash flow. So oh, I need to drag that down because the do nothing alternative has a net cash flow of 0. So the present worth is going to be 0 of that bundle, right? But A, we have 2,500 in revenue every year. B has revenue of 1,300 every year, and so on. Okay, so revenue for AB is just A and B And if we wanted to, we could, you know, label these. I could call this like A rev. I could call this B rev. You know, like if I wanted to do that same thing before as giving a new name to the cell. But I won't. I'll just do A plus C, B plus C, B plus D, and C plus D. Okay, now let's just see. Does all of that revenue yet? That matches up. Okay, now present value is going to be the cost plus, because cost is already at present, right? And then this annual net cash flow, that's recurring. There's 8 payments where each year is being discounted at 12%. So I'm going to do the PV function with the amounts that are here, and these are A's. So I'm going to put it into the payment field. Okay, so equals PV, and it's asking for the interest rate, which we know is 12%. And I'm going to anchor that reference with F4 because I intend to drag the formula down. It's asking for NPER, and that's here where I've got 8 periods for our N. Again, I'm going to anchor that with F4, comma. Now we oftentimes skip over the payment field, but hopefully by now you've kind of got a sense for what goes into the payment field versus what goes into the future value field. These are not just single lump sum amounts one time in the future. This is an annual recurring amount. So that goes into the payment field. And because of the thing we all know about, how Excel always changes the sign in the financial functions, we need to put a minus there to overcome its habit. So minus of annual net cash flow, close parentheses. Okay, so that's going to be just the present value of the revenue, but now I also need to add in the present value of the cost, which is already at the present value. So this PV function found the present value of the revenue, but then I'm doing plus the cost. So you add together the cost, which is already at the present, and that's an outflow, with the present equivalent of the annual inflows from revenue. So bundle A, just the single option A, has an overall value of 2419. And I think that I've anchored things so that I can just drag that down now. Any reference up here to the top should be anchored, but if it's a reference for the row that I'm in, so the green and the purple one, that shouldn't be referenced. So the formula is rate is 12%, N is 8%, and then I put the annual net cash flow into the PMT field. I don't do the double comma here. We frequently do, but this time I'm putting the annual net cash flow into the payment field with the minus sign before it. And then outside of the parentheses, so close parentheses, and outside of that I'm adding in the cost, which is already at the present. Okay. Now drag it down. Which alternative is best? We've already eliminated the alternatives that were above the budget limit. So we're ignoring those. These are the alternatives that are within the budget limit. Which, what do we call these? Which bundle should we choose? Well, AC. Yes, that's right. And to make it even more obvious that it's AC, let me do a conditional formatting on it. So I'm going to highlight all of these amounts. I'm going to go here onto the ribbon. In the Home tab, there's conditional formatting. And I want to highlight, the top. Yeah, top slash bottom. So I want to have not the top 10, I want it to be format only the top or bottom ranked value, the top one. So it's going to pick the largest one, and then the formatting I want it to do is I want it to fill the cell with yellow and make the font bold, not strike through. I don't know why it defaulted with strike through. Bold, and it's going to fill the cell yellow. So now I click OK. All right, and there, just to draw attention to it now, the conditional formatting is always looking in this range of cells, and so if I manually changed something, like if I made this one so that it's 8,200 a year, then that's going to become, oh, okay, no, option D. So if I just changed option D, then CD becomes the most valuable. Interesting. But you notice that the conditional formatting reacted to that change. So let me undo that change. Okay, so for the in-class exercise, what we would say is bundle AC should be selected, or a budget limit of $23,500. And it's interesting that that wasn't the most expensive group. There were other groups that were closer to the budget limit. You maybe would think, just spend the most money possible, that would give you the most revenue. But it doesn't. The best option is AC, because that's the maximum present value of the profit while you're still within this budget limit. Okay? So now if you look at the homework that is posted for this time around, I think I've got it here in my recent files and can bring it up. Okay. All the language in this homework should seem pretty familiar, because I mentioned what's the budget limit. Here we have the MAR. We have the initial cost for each of these options, the revenue for each of the options. The one little wrinkle is that they have different useful lives. All that means is that when you are calculating the present value, that you don't use the same N for each of the options. That's fine. It's okay. It just means that when you find the present value of the revenue, each alternative is going to have its different lifespan. You don't have to do anything fancy. You don't have to do LCM or repeatability, that sort of thing. So that's problem one, budget limitation. Essentially the same kind of a thing that we just did in class today. And then the second problem here on the back side of the paper is just some simple arithmetic to get you thinking a little bit about the project. Okay? So that's due on Friday. Let's just take one last look at these announcements. That the homework is due on Friday. The project is due on the 21st of April. And that's all I have for you today. Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a good one.